session. The Senate is now in session. And before we go any further, we need to observe 1 minute silence in the passing of our sixth Prime Minister, Right Honorable Wayne Seymour Arthur.
May he rest in peace.
No. Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor, the President.
I've heard from Senators Moore, Maynard, and Rogers that they will be joining us later. Unfortunately, they could not be here for the start of this session.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers, reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate, and moved by a minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move suspension of standing order number 22-1 for the remainder of today's sitting.
Yes. The question is that Standing Order 22-1 be suspended for the balance of the day's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and that relevant Standing Order 22-1 is now suspended.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the following two resolutions. A resolution to approve the Public Service General Order 2020 and the resolution to approve the Public Service Teachers Amendment Order 2020. I beg to give notice of the Representation of the People Amendment Bill 2020, and I beg to give notice of the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Bill 2020. I beg to move that those two bills be now read a first time.
Question is that the two bills that's mentioned by the Leader of the House and the two resolutions be now read a first time. So the bill, that is, the bill be now read a first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 2, sir. In the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Integrity in Public Life Bill 2020.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I rise to start off the second reading debate on this piece of this bill, I must crave your indulgence at the onset, sir. And having had a minute's silence in honor of the passing of Prime Minister, Right Honorable Owen Arthur, you will pardon if I reflect for a few minutes. It will not, I can assure you, will not be a tribute, because I anticipate in this, he having been an honorable member of this chamber, that in due course we will have the appropriate resolution prepared. But you will see the link that I will make between my reflection and this bill today. Indeed, Professor Arthur has made an indelible contribution to Barbados, certainly in terms of the social and economic changes within this country during the time during which he was Prime Minister. It's known, I think all of us would have heard, or some of us would have encountered, his very sharp wit, his immense intellect, and indeed his incisive rhetorical skills. But I first encountered him in Jamaica as a humble medical student back then. And we got to know each other, I put it like that. I believe at the outset it was not as easy, because he had an opinion of medical students coming from Barbados and throughout the region, of thinking that they were the creme de la creme, and that the medical students just focused on medicine and did nothing else but focus on medicine, and we were very narrow in our outlook on the world, and he abhorred this, until he discovered that I could engage him about Franz Fanon and Walter Rodney at that time. He was known as TAS. I was just humble X. That's what they called me on campus. So much for that. But I relate it to today because he has affected my life in three ways, in terms of having invited me to serve at the highest level in my country. And indeed, he invited me to serve on the cabinet, in Cabinet of Barbados on the 11th of September, 2001. I know that our neighbors to the north, they don't celebrate that, but for me, 9/11 is of tremendous significance. It was a day when he invited me to serve in cabinet and to serve my country at the highest level. He made two statements to me subsequently. One was, face it and fix it. When the issues arose, no need to complain and try to blame, but face it, deal with it. But more importantly and privately, I had a discussion, I believe it was the first year that I was a minister. Something was bothering me. I'm not going to go into details of it this morning. But he said to me when I explained the position and how I felt, to do what I had intended to do. And he told me, and I'll never forget it, Jerome, you came into politics with your integrity. Ensure that when you leave politics, you still have your integrity. And so, Mr. President, that is the link to today's debate. This bill has been long in coming. I believe some would argue it has been long overdue. I believe in 1984, Sir Henry Ford, at that time he was not Attorney General, laid a bill back in 1984, an integrity bill. Perhaps my learned colleague on the other side might have more information on this. As I get older, my memory eludes me. And I believe it died with that session. The BLP lost the government in 1986, and it never was debated. Over the years, there have been the accusations from both sides in terms of corruption and plans and promises to have integrity legislation and anti-corruption legislation. In 2008, during the campaign, the Democratic Labour Party made much weather of having an integrity bill in place, and they went across the length and breadth of this country stating, and it was in the manifesto, that within 100 days of being elected and returning to office, that they would bring integrity legislation to the Parliament of Barbados. Like many of their promises then, it was just wild imaginings. And it was not until their second term that they actually brought an integrity bill to the House of Assembly. That bill was debated, second reading, as it went to a select committee in which members of the opposition then participated. And at the end, having ignored many of the suggestions made by persons who sat on the select committee, it was passed. I believe it was 2017. However, it was never proclaimed, so it never became a statute or law in this country. Sir, you would be well aware that whilst we were in opposition, and during that period, that the Barbados Labour Party set about preparing its own draft integrity bill. We put together a number of best legal minds in the country, across party. There were BLP members, there were neutral members, and indeed there were perhaps one or two DLP members who had covert discussions regarding this prospect. And indeed there was a group in Barbados, I believe it was Integrity Barbados, which was advocating, and we had meetings with them in terms of the issues raised. The Barbados Labour Party, we came to the conclusion and were adamant that there was need for integrity legislation in Barbados. And certainly in terms of our manifesto, and this is already a document of the Honourable Chamber on page 42, if I may quote, Mr. President, it said that the BLP will promote good governance by, at the first sitting of Parliament, laying the Integrity Commission Bill to fight corruption, protect whistleblowers, and usher in a new period of transparency in the governance of our national affairs. Before my colleague from the other side starts jumping and saying that it wasn't laid at the first sitting, what I can say is that the debate on it started on July the 10th, 2018, 1 month after we assumed government of the country. It went on to state that immediately after the election required ministers to declare their assets, and Mr. President, many people might not know that all of the members of cabinet were given forms to submit and to declare their assets. And these were given all. Mr. President, as I was saying, immediately after the election, there was a requirement, as in the manifesto, for all ministers to declare their assets. And these forms and documents, I believe, have been lodged with the Cabinet Office, and I'm assured that they are in a safe there. We also spoke in the manifesto to introduce election campaign finance reform, and this is a matter that is being addressed, and establishing an anti-corruption unit and other matters, which are being dealt with at this point in time. So that is what the BLP said. It was a promise, and I am therefore elated that we are here at this stage today in this honorable chamber where we have reached, where we are having the second reading debate on this bill. A promise made, a promise kept. And again, and if I may go back to Professor Arthur, face it and fix it. We recognize, of course, that in Barbados there's always been the talk about persons in the public sector, politicians, senior public servants, and this issue of corruption. But Mr. President, although I am pleased, I must say at this point in time, that though we speak of public life and prevention of corruption in public life, I would not want honorable members in this chamber to be deluded into the sense that in the private sector there is not extensive corruption. And so I know that another pet peeve of Professor Arthur was this issue in Barbados in terms of the feeling that all politicians, all public servants were corrupt, and indeed that some of these accusations were being made by persons in the private sector who were indulging and, if I may use the verb, encouraging these manifestations of corruption by those in the public sector. So let us put it there that this is part of improving or reducing the level of corruption in society by bringing legislation to address that in the public sector. Clearly, corruption in the private sector is another matter and another issue that the society as a whole will hopefully deal with in ensuing years. Mr. President, the issue of corruption is a global problem. I believe I was reading recently a magazine, and it said that yearly, globally, $1 trillion US is paid out in bribes across the world, and that as much as $2.5 trillion is stolen through corruption. And a lot of this happens in the so-called developed world. We always hear about the developing world and banana republics in Africa, but a large part of this occurs in the so-called developed world. And in Barbados, historically, we have had the accusations about persons, and these are commonplace. I mean, where it depends on where you go. Often Saturdays you're relaxing, you can hear all sorts of stories about accusations of corruptions and persons speaking with a certain self-assuredness of though they have all the details and the information. But I gather that some of them, in some cases, when asked to come forward and offer evidence, then you hear all sorts of stories. But they were willing to speak about this so-called corruption and name persons. There have been unflattering references to politicians, especially post-independence in Barbados. I think, Mr. President, you'll be well aware of them. All of us have been accused. And when they speak of corruption among politicians, there is no not him, not her. All of us are painted with the same brush. Indeed, in this honorable chamber, though there is a category of independent to the average person out on the street in Barbados, all of the senators are politicians, be they B, D, independent, whatever, PDP, I believe that is a party too. They are painted with that same brush of accusation. Yes, Senator Drakes. All of us are painted with that. And indeed, the social media has assisted this, would be putting it mildly, because now you're able to put out there information that is factual, non-factual, fabricated, out from the imagination, and persons spread it and take it as gospel and believe it, depending on their perspective. Indeed, Mr. President, the politicians are to blame to some extent. We well remember an election campaign in 2008 when we heard accusations about the extension of the highway, and we heard about it was highway robbery. We heard that the late Prime Minister, regrettably late Prime Minister Thompson, had the lists of all of the Swiss account numbers for the members of the BLP cabinet. Mr. President, I was part of that cabinet. And I have never had an account, certainly in Switzerland or Europe or North America, so I don't know what sort of list it was, but it was taken as gospel. And indeed, we live to see that while we were talking about highway robbery and Swiss accounts, we then had the whole issue of CLICO and the interlinkages and the entanglement that was not corruption. So it just goes to show how we as a class, by criticizing and berating each other and creating false stories just for the purpose of a vote, that we have encouraged this feeling in Barbados. And so we had, in 2008 again, the promise that there would be absolute transparency and good governance on the part of the DLP at that time. At that time, I said, because clearly, once that was written and printed in the manifesto, it was removed from their psyche, certainly in terms of transparency and good governance. And this would have led to the revelations of the last Public Accounts Committee report, in where it spoke about contracts for $21 million and $19 million, and contracts moving from $19 million to $27 million for the building of national housing units. And not a single tender, nothing, not one. And indeed, the Auditor General's report in terms of the award of contracts and the acquisitions at the Barbados Water Authority. So much for good governance and transparency. And so this bill, and if you pardon if I read the object, the bill will establish a regime including an integrity commission to promote the integrity of persons in public life and strengthen measures for the prevention, detection, investigation, and prosecution of acts of corruption. And that is just an extra in terms of the object. This bill will help to create the milieu for us in terms of bringing greater transparency and good governance to Barbados. And indeed, though persons may have issues in terms of their assets and privilege and privacy, it will indeed help persons in terms of protection of their reputations. And no doubt, in the end, with public education, will try to give some level of comfort and confidence to the average citizen of Barbados in terms of our systems, in terms of their views on our systems and practices being corrupt. And indeed could perhaps lead eventually to a new view of the politician and public sector officials. And I know that Senator Boyce is at idem with me on this. We have spoken about it, and he certainly feels, and he said so, that this will bring us closer to that dream of his. Mr. President, we are at the second reading. Get it. I don't believe that Mr. President, I know you can't hear as sides, but I don't believe that the honorable member on the other side is disassociating himself from what I just said. But in terms of the process, we are at the second reading. And I must say that it has been a long process. It started, as I said, in July 2018, second reading, and the decision to go to a select committee. And indeed, some members of this honorable chamber served on that select committee, and I expect that they will have some input in today's debate. I'm informed that there were 13 sessions at the select committee, and they received several oral and written presentations from various groups, individuals across this country. The bill had been posted on the website, and comments were made. And indeed, there is a report of the Joint Select Committee, Mr. President. I was fighting with it for the last couple of days. Several pages. I thought it was impossible to use the technology to scroll up and down something. It was easier to open it and scribble and mark it up. And it has not been completed. And a new bill has been produced by the CPC based on obvious submissions which were made to the Select Committee, and indeed based on decisions of this select committee. And there is a table of concordance in terms of the major changes that were made. And I don't plan, Mr. President, to go through all the debates and all of the clauses of this bill today. I am just going to look certainly in terms of some of the amendments that were made coming out of the meetings of the select committee. Certainly in terms of definitions, amendments were made to this. The whole issue in terms of the details of the establishment of the Integrity Commission and indeed the functioning of that commission, I believe that came in for quite a lot of discussion, and appropriate amendments were made. Deletion of clauses 49 to 58 of the original bill were made because the government has, that spoke about corruption, anti-corruption, and the government has laid in the lower house, I believe, an anti-corruption bill, which has been laid in the lower house. So it felt that in this case, there was no need for that because you're going to have integrity bill, anti-corruption, and indeed clauses 68 to 71, which dealt with the whole issue of whistleblower. There will also now be a whistleblower bill. So there will be three pieces of legislation: the integrity bill, anti-corruption, and whistleblower. And indeed, there was the new section 57, recognizing that there would be requirement for an alteration of section 112 of the Constitution to provide for the inclusion of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Auditor General in the second schedule of the bill. In terms of just briefly go through the various parts of the bill, Mr. President. When you're indulgent, of course, part 1 will deal with the definitions, etc. Part 2 deals with the establishment and function of the commission. As I said, this was an area which there was much discussion at the level of the Joint Select Committee. Part 3 deals with the declarations, and the declarations requires all persons in public life who are specified in the second schedule that every 2 years there must be declarations of their financial affairs with the Commission. It also speaks to the examination and explains the steps the Commission will make in relation to these matters. And Part 4 speaks to what is registrable and what are prohibited interests. Part 5 speaks to the whole issue of gifts and requires every specified person who receives a gift worth more than $2,500 to report that to the Commission. Part 6 speaks to the conduct in public life, and there was a whole issue in terms of a code of conduct, and this is also one of the schedules, and this is another area that I believe there was much discussion about in the Select Committee. Part 7 deals with the power to require further information and to conduct investigations. Part 8 gets into the whole issue of investigations. And then there's, of course, the Part 9, which is miscellaneous. So they're all in all 58 clauses, I believe, and I don't intend to go into them in much detail. Mr. President, there are various schedules. Obviously, the first one has to do with the Integrity Commission itself, its composition. And it says the members of the Commission, a person who's held the office of judge in a superior court of record in any part of the Commonwealth, appointed by the Governor General after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. B, an attorney at law with at least 10 years standing, whose name appears on the roll of attorneys at law pursuant to the Legal Profession Act, and will be appointed by the Governor General after consultation with the Council of the Bar Association. C, a chartered or certified accountant of at least 7 years standing, appointed by the Governor General after consultation with anybody, which in his opinion represents chartered or certified accountants in Barbados. D, a member of the clergy, appointed by the Governor General after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. E, a person appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, and if a person appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. So in the selection and the members of the Commission, we can see a transparent and equitable process. It speaks to the appointment of a chairman, and the Governor General speaks to that, will appoint a person acting in his discretion or her discretion, appoint a member of the Commission to be the chairman. And indeed in that schedule it deals with the functioning of the Commission. And the second schedule speaks to the specified persons in public life, and it lists the various areas where and the persons to be come under the remit of this bill. The third schedule deals with the issues of the forms for declaration. I think the third schedule deals with the declaration form. The fourth schedule deals with the code of conduct. And indeed, the fifth schedule speaks to the oath of office that the various members of the Commission will be asked to fulfill. Mr. President, as I said at the beginning, this is a very important and historical bill in terms of Barbados. It is a promise that the government made in their election campaign, and they have kept it. As I said, there is a bill coming, anti-corruption, which has been laid in the lower house. And it speaks to the government's intention to bring about a change in the way that we do governance in Barbados, to improve governance in Barbados, to make it much more efficient, recognizing that, like other countries, there are huge savings that can be made if we are in a position to root out aspects of corruption within government and to introduce a more transparent and equitable system in terms of the governance and the procurement in governance in Barbados. Mr. President, I expect that other members who serve on this in the Joint Select Committee will have quite a bit to say. And with those few words, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. I'm obliged to you.
President Franklin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I too will not be long. And this bill was intended from the outset to regulate thieving politicians. This was all about. You know, because the system in this country, sir, is that everybody was crying out that the politicians are stealing, everybody, and whether they're stealing or not. You heard that there were, and over the years, I remember as far back as Tom Adams, there was talk about prevention of corruption. Even before Henry Ford's bill in '84, there was, because the Barbados Labour Party came into power in 1976, and one of the things that was on the platform was people, you remember those infamous checks where the Prime Minister, but he was then leader of the opposition, had pointed out that certain people in Barbados were receiving inside and out of Barbados. So we were talking about corruption and anti-corruption for a very long time. But it never ever seemed to have gotten on the books until the last administration passed one. But it never saw the light of day in that it was never proclaimed. This administration came in and they decided they're going to ignore that one completely and they're going to do their own thing. I was a bit cynical and I was saying, well, they were giving themselves time to get rich before they have to declare their assets and stuff, you know, but that was my cynicism. I don't know if that was the case because I didn't see why they couldn't enforce the legislation that was already there. So, but we have a habit of not enforcing legislation dealing with corruption. We have on the books in Barbados piece of legislation called the Prevention of Corruption Act. It's a 1920, something around that. I can't remember the date now. But 1929. But we have never used it, or as far as I know, used it to hold anybody accountable. And it can still be used today. As a matter of fact, sir, if you allow me to digress a little bit, that act has been used by the United States to hold one of ours. Because he couldn't have been found guilty of laundering money if that money was not from illegal sources. Because I can go to the United States with $1 million in my pocket and tell people, look, there's my money, and they can't do me anything as long as I declare it. But you did not declare that money, and they traced that it was from an illegal source. So if the money was not gotten illegally, the Americans couldn't have held him. And they used our Prevention of Corruption Act to hold a former minister in the last administration. I'm pleased to heard that he's awaiting sentence. I hope that would have been enough to discourage a few. Or at least if you're not discouraging a few from stealing, at least not carried it to the United States. But, so that act is there. So why have we not been using it over the years? We have heard about politicians, when their mother dying, they go to their bank account and discover the mother had $5 million. Mother who never worked. I'm wondering how it got in her account. Because I know, I go to the bank with a few dollars and they ask me where I get it from. You know? And I said, you know, it was amazing. You know, when I got fired from a certain place, they had to pay me out because the dismissal was unfair. I was wrongful at the time. Unfair dismissal was not been championed yet. And they gave me a check for more than the $10,000 to cover me for the, plus they pay me for what they owed me and make sure they pay me a little bit more that I don't have a case in court, because if I go to court and apply to get less money than they already give me, that'd be foolishness. So I go to the bank, to my bank, which was, by the way, also their bank, with a check. And they asked me where I get the money from. I said, from in there. You got the money in there. So I ain't got to tell you where the money come from. You already have it. I didn't bring cash to you and Concordance and give you. I brought a check on one of your clients' accounts. They have the money in their account, and they transfer it to mine. And even taking it off and go, so they come back with it. So what you want me to declare where I get it from? You know where I get it from. I get it from you. So we had a big argument. Eventually, I was able to prevail, and they didn't have to fill out any forms, because I thought it was foolishness. And I don't like to participate in stupidity. That was stupid. They told me, no, you guys, I said, I'm not filling out anything. Simply because they knew where I got the money from. It didn't like I came in there one day with a paint skillet full of money and start, and they thought, no, I got a check. So we had legislation already in place, but we wouldn't use it. I've heard it said that you couldn't backdate this legislation, but you have legislation that was already on the book since 1929, so you could have used that. And the Americans showed us how we could have used it. So thank you, United States, because that has put some fear in politicians who might be tempted to do the country. You know, sir, just by the way, I was also offered by that same company some money in terms of probably wanted me to sell out one of the people that was representing. I said to the person, you know, I can't work for you and them. So I never got the commissions from the policies. I never brought to them. So they were trying to get as many people as possible to corrupt. So so it is not new. But thankfully, sir, I have never been tempted by things like that. Or not. I too, when I went to the United States to look for my son, I might still be up there now. So it is still good that I was able to resist the temptation. But I'm wondering, sir, if we didn't have this legislation in place and we had the other one, why have we not been using it over the years? I understand, sir. I understand that the investigation might be a bit difficult, but the police have done lots of investigations, and they have been able to come up with things that you didn't expect. But so we should have allowed the investigation to proceed. Because let me tell you something. You have a man who is a pauper. He gets into public office. You know his salary. And we had lots of those, you know, especially in last administration. We had a lot of paupers there. So you know how much money he's making a month. Everybody in this room, I know the salary of, because it's published in the official gazette. So if you get a salary of, let's say, $16,000, salary and allowances and stuff, and you end up, after 4 years, having saved some of it, and saved some of it, you end up with $5 million, you've got a problem. After 4 years, you can't save $5 million out of your salary as an MP. So that is enough to give me reason to investigate you. And you don't have to go far. The Income Tax Act provides a mechanism where if you are showing that you have all this substantial income, you would have had to pay substantial taxes. And having not paid the taxes, then the Commission of Inland Revenue could have made an assessment. That's what they did with Al Capone. He killed a lot of people allegedly, and they couldn't get him for murder, but they got him for tax evasion. So we have those same laws in Barbados too, but we were not using them. And we are not using them because it did not benefit, or it was not, but we heard in our friends. You know, people say all politicians are friends. I don't think that is true, because I know people who are not friends with each other. But you probably not want to do it, because when their turn comes, they might investigate me. And I suspect that is why we have never had politicians, especially, under the kind of scrutiny. Because, sir, let me tell you something. It pains me, and it bothers me. It's very ironic that this act is coming to be debated, and can only be debated by politicians. But the thing is, the politicians who's bringing this act, how did they get here? Well, when I say here, I don't mean in this sense because it was appointed. You were appointed. But I'm talking about the people who were elected. So prevention of corruption. Corruption is not only receiving money. There's a lot of other things, and I can talk about some of them. But one is elections corruption. There's a lot of that in Barbados. Even though we are told that we had free and fair elections, but big joke. I can't remember an election that was free and fair in my lifetime. We've had politicians declaring how much they spent in an election. I have not, the last time I saw such fiction is when I used to read things like Dickens. And nobody investigates it. Even though there is an authority that should scrutinize those election returns and then if you have breached those regulations, you can forfeit your seat. But people submit anything, as long as you put it in on paper and send it in, no investigation. I remember some years ago, I took it upon myself to go into the registry and request copies of the returns. At first, the people denied me. They had to show them the law. The law said, I am entitled. And they can pay my money. I paid $3 for a whole set of I hope you'll forgive me for that, sir, but I welcome the new minister in our midst. So I went to the registry, as I said, and I got election returns. And it was such fiction. We had people who did not have a phone in their campaign office. They never declared it. You remember ever having an election where there was no phone in the office? That should have sent out a red flag to the chief electoral officer to say that something got to be wrong with this thing. We had people who didn't have any posters. But I saw posters. I put on some of them. So I know they had posters. But those they never declared them in their returns. And they can't tell me that the party paid for them because the party didn't declare that they had paid for them either. Because for each person, every time you receive money from anybody, the person who receives it has to declare it. And the person who donates it, they also have to file a return with the electoral office. I remember hearing a politician, seeing him cry recently, not a politician, a businessman, and he said that he's given money to both political parties. I said, that ain't true. You want to know why? Because you have never filed a return with the electoral office to say that you have given X political party or Y political party any money. So if you are saying that you have given money to these people, where is the proof? That too is corruption. But nobody deals with it. And these same people who manage to get in office corruptly are now being high and mighty and want to regulate everybody, whosoever will, they want to regulate. This act was about, as I said, thieving politicians. We want to regulate them. But the politicians decided they want to regulate everybody else. But the people who they want to regulate were already regulated. We are dealing with permanent secretaries. We are dealing with heads of departments and people of related grades. Those people are already regulated. There are service commissions to deal with them. Now, if you have information that permanent secretaries and these senior public officers are corrupt, then there is a way to deal with them. Why here? They didn't set out in any public life as I understand it to be, because there's not defined here in the Act what public life is. Because the public life that we were talking about and that we were hoping to people regulate were the politicians who everybody was, because I always thought the politicians wanted to show my hands are clean. We got mechanisms for dealing with other people. Use them. Because then if you are saying that you are regulating everybody under this piece of legislation, they've been regulated already, but you're going to regulate them again. If you are saying that, you have magistrates. Magistrates are included in this legislation. But you are not regulating judges. Why not? I'm concerned about that. And if there's one thing that bothers me about this, it is that. A few other things. Why magistrates are not judges? A magistrate can decide, well, I ain't going to find this guilty, fellow guilty, and then get me to change. But so too can a judge. And the judges have a bigger jurisdiction, higher amounts. They can receive more. So why not regulate judges? And don't tell me that you can't change their terms and conditions, because I heard that nonsense happen in Trinidad. They come with some case before a judge, and the judge decided that, or it would be changing their terms and conditions. Their terms and conditions, you can change the Constitution, as we are doing here now, because this act has to alter the Constitution. So if we are saying that, no, alter the Constitution to include them. If there's one thing that will cause me not to support it, is that. Because you can't be, on one hand, saying you want to regulate people, and then you're going to selectively take out people who can. And I'm not saying they do or are or anything like that. I'm saying who can be subject to massive corruption. And so if you are leaving out judges, leave out people who are junior to them like permanent secretaries, leave out deputy permanent secretaries and heads of departments. Because, as I said, there's already mechanisms in place for dealing with them. So, and let me stick to the politicians in this act, because we want to make sure that the politicians are above board. We've heard rumors. I remember when I was a little boy, we've heard about politicians stealing, and it was more like folklore. You know, everybody used to hear about it. So I'm happy that the government is taking the step to regulate people, but I think they're overreaching. They're overreaching. So I cannot support that aspect of it, and so I can't support peace and not peace. So if you take these out, you have my full support. But I am not going down the road with you. I represent civil servants every day. And when they get into trouble, they come to see me. And so I know that there are rules governing them and rules governing their conduct. Take it out. If you want my support, take it out. But you don't need it, but if you want it, take it out. Because I am not going on that road with you. Is it not a politicians want to pull everybody in the mix? This is about them. This isn't about anybody else. We have situations in Barbados, sir, where certain people always get the tender. If the Democrat Labour Party is in power, Democrat Labour Party people get the tender. If the Barbados Labour Party is in power, their people get the tender. I find it strange. So we need to deal with things like that. You know, take away the tendering process from cabinet. You know, over the years, yeah, the cabinet approves them, and then what you do sometimes you come out and you say, oh, this service or whatever we are doing cannot be done by locally or not, or only a few people, so we can pick somebody. But you want to test the market. So over the year, I remember former member of the other place, Dr. Haynes, he always used to complain about this, and he recommended a contractor general. That would be. No, I know everybody always talking about these things, but when you get in the office, you don't put them in place. You find other things to trouble you. You forget your promises. All you need to do is to set the cabinet set the policy and put your officers in place to deal with the process. But you get too much hands-on. And as a result, that's why people think that politicians, that the ministers are corrupt, because they get involved in things that don't concern them. Now we see, like for instance, in the one I spoke about earlier, where the minister was able to call people about insurance and that kind of stuff. Not his job. But you see why now? So the temptation to be corrupt and the avenues for corruption, there are too many. So politicians need to get themselves out of a lot of things that don't concern them. Even appointments in the public service. You know, the Prime Minister has the right to be consulted on heads of departments and permanent secretaries and their deputies. But we have politicians intervening at the level of clerical officer and getting their man or woman appointed in preference to somebody else. Mind you, we have legislation to deal with that, but the legislation is ignored. Sometimes we had at the prison recently, where about 40 people were appointed. Not one fellow was interviewed because people got in there and they do their own thing. All that is corruption. You know? So don't let us water this thing down to the extent where you have a commission now got too much work that they can't handle it. This is about politicians. And when I say politicians, I don't mean people like me. You pay me $1,400 a month, and you want me to declare my assets, mind you, that is one sheet of paper and half letter size in my case. But it is not fair enough for me for my wife to declare her assets. You're asking my wife to declare assets and I to declare assets. You give me $1,400. And there's no avenue for me to steal. I don't get involved in your contracts and your tendering or anything like that. It is our business. Independent centers, opposition centers, why you want us to declare assets? You know? Yeah? Because we are not all made of the same thing. If you're saying members of the Senate who are cabinet members or parliamentarians and stuff, so be it. But you are telling me that I don't have to spill my guts before the Integrity Commission. Mind you, I don't have a lot of things to spill, but it seems to me that if you're asking me who get $1,400 a month, you're going to start asking everybody over $1,400. It's not going to be from made up. From made up in the public service. So I think you need a rethink. And I spoke about this in the Joint Select Committee because I think it is unnecessary. It is giving the Commission too much work to do where you do not have the avenue for corruption. What are you going to do? Come in here and do what? But they don't pay me the money anyhow. So I can decide I can sell my vote to who? You know? You can always vote me, the only two of us over here. So you are overreaching, trying to give this act more than it needs. But when you do that, it takes away from the politicians who should be the subject of this act. We want the politicians to declare their assets because we know, as I said, we have too many paupers saving millions out of $1,600 in 4 years. I don't know what you're talking about, but if you know something, you tell me. I don't sell anything to anybody. I sell my services, my intellect. That's all I sell. So if you know about people who sell things, and it's very difficult for me because I don't sell out. Many people come to me and they're wrong. I said this to me. You know, if you don't work me for you. But let me see if we can beg for you. I'm going to beg real bad. When they come to the front, you're guilty. So I sell that. And I'll tell you something. When people admit that they're wrong and it's shock the employer is back off and say, okay, we can hear a break. Most of the time, but that's what I sell. I don't sell anything else. So I'm worried. So if you know about things, tell me. You tell the Senate. So my other problem with this thing, is, apart from the civil servants who are being regulated, is who else shouldn't be? And I offer me for, you know, you give me $1,400, and you want me now going to spill everything. Mind you, as I said, but me now it ain't much. So what this act should have been concerned about, what is the mischief that you're trying to fix? What is the mischief? The mischief, and the main mischief is that we've had a problem, or alleged problem, because there was no proof, because you didn't want proof, because the proof was right in front of you. I cited some about the election returns. You didn't want proof, but no, you wanted to let the public feel that you are above board. So it was you meaning the politicians, who wanted this act in place to clear your good names. Then it should be about you. Now, if you want to have something else for other people, do it. But you have a situation where no. The Integrity Commission will have its hands full with the 30 people on stage already, plus a few up here who might be ministers and that kind of stuff. You're giving them too much work, too much unnecessary work. I got to go every 2 years now. I got to go and declare my assets. My assets is snow. you know, and precious little after that, you know. But no, it's quite valuable, trust me. So, again, I need that out. I will support it if those things are missing. But I cannot, in all good conscience, knowing that we want to hold the politicians, and the politicians don't hold everybody else. No, don't put us down tires with the same brush. We ain't got the same avenues. And any public servant who is corrupt, and you can find him to be so, there's a public service commissioner, there's a commissioner of police. You know, the police don't like to deal with the politicians when they have to, because the police frightened know that there will always be a sergeant if he's a sergeant, and he will never get past there. He wouldn't have that with people like me. So the police can investigate me. So let the police do their work. I see you have here also the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Attorney General. Do not legislate for persons. That's all I'm saying. I'm not calling any names. I am saying the legislation should not be about who did what. So we can do it, we can put him in there because a certain person did something. If you had the goods on somebody, go ahead and let him go. But don't sneak something like this through the back door. Oh Lord, I'm using that back door thing again. And trying to fix problems that exist when there are other avenues for doing so. Mr. President, I can go on because there are lots of other people, like for instance the statutory board people. Yes, right, check them because they're outside of the public service and they don't have any particular rules. We have chairmen who go and buy parks for buses. And, you know, so regulate them because they are not bound by any particular rules. But the civil service, there's the general orders, the public service regulations, the Public Service Act, even the Income Tax Act, to hold you if you got more money than you can account for, everything else. So leave the civil servants where they are and concentrate on the problem. You know? I hear somebody look at me and tell me, oh, you know, customs officers got these big houses and things. Why customs officers got a big house? You know, most of them work for them. Because customs get a lot of allowances for doing work after hours, and they're paid for them, and they're paid nicely for them. So if you can get, you know, so but if you have information about a corrupt customs officer, then deal with him or her. But you don't. But because there are avenues for doing so. So don't tell me about customs officers. We can deal with them if you find them. But we didn't have any to deal with the politicians. And the politicians were getting away scot-free from the time Adam was a lad. So this is what this bill should be about. And I would have no problem supporting it. I pointed out where my difficulties are. Yes, if you look at the second schedule there, you have every conceivable board and government institution listed as the people who are heads of these boards and stuff. And I can understand, when you have like the Water Authority who spend over $1 billion and nobody knows where that $1 billion went. So yes, let those board people who come into office, and if you are going to make them board chairman, allow them to declare their assets because they have avenues for getting their hands on government money. But the poor fellow who didn't sign on for this public life thing that you're talking about, the senior civil servant, he didn't sign on for this. He don't want you to know his business. That's why they remain and should remain in I don't want to say secret, but you shouldn't. The politicians are the people who face the public. The civil servants who serve them and should serve them, and whichever politician comes, whichever party, the civil servant should remain anonymous and do their job. If you have a problem with them, deal with it with the rules that exist. There are more than enough rules. So I am saying to you, leave out the civil service out of this. But if you're going to put them in, put in the judges too. You can't have it both ways. Not that I know of any judges that are corrupt. But there's potential. Same potential that the magistrates have, they got. Explain to me the rationale behind leaving out the higher judiciary and bringing in the lower fellows. You know? Let me give you an example. If you want to bring in everybody, you got a court martial, but you not regulate him. The court can send him out looking for a fella. He can't find him. Mind you, the fella live next door, but you can't find him. So what you can do? You can regulate him too. I'll give a little story. Some years ago, a court martial reported one of his seniors for perjury. That court martial got demoted. Not the one that was doing the perjury. As a matter of fact, I still have the affidavit that the guy perjured himself on my bike somewhere. I always walk with it. Yeah, here it is. This guy, the guy who did the perjury, was influenced by a politician who said, look, this is my friend, so don't lock up he. So the particular marshal, the senior fellow, withdrew the warrant. But the guy turned up to court on a summons this time, and the marshals held him. And we have a thing said, they can't be found. I got it here. He can't be found. And the marshal who reported it, he got into trouble. So we got to put mechanisms in place to deal with, and let's talk about whistleblower thing and another piece of legislation that we dealt with, but we need to deal with things like this first. I can call names, but I didn't give the president the notice that I will call any names inside here. I'm sure if I call the name, the president would know which particular marshal I'm talking about. We have situations where marshals had a writ of possession, I think they call it, and they get a call, what are you doing to execute that writ? And when he decides he can go and do his job, I had to go and defend him. Because the court issued him instructions, and he's following the court order, the court given order, and somebody else called back and said, that's my friend. So you don't, or that's a friend of a friend. And when he decided that he had to do what the court ordered, he ended up in trouble, and they had to go and represent him. So we got a lot of corruption in this place. Yes, there's a lot. It isn't only about receiving money, but there are avenues. And the Public Service Act makes it an offense for a public officer to know of a criminal, know that one of their juniors or anybody for that matter is involved in the crime, and you don't report it. So there's enough legislation for public servants. There's none so far for politicians other than the common law. misfeasance in public office and malfeasance in public office and stuff. We got those, they're still on the books, but nobody ever lock up anybody here. I know you want pull everybody in to your confusion. The public want the politicians regulated. They want to know what they're doing. They've been talking about the fella down the line who is subject to various other rules. Mr. President, I've said that so many times it's funny. And I'm prepared to support this legislation if you remove the requirement for magistrates, permanent secretaries, and heads of departments. And I will be the first person to vote yes. I'm not voting for it because and also the senators, the independent senators, and the opposition senators, and even the government senators who don't hold office. Why should you be prying into their personal lives like this? You know, we want the politicians who have the opportunity to get their hands on. From nobody can bribe me. And then if my mouth too big, so nobody can want to bribe me anyhow. But they want to see the politicians who, over the years, they have alleged have been in corruption. You do not regulate them under the legislative act that was already there, and you bring one now to regulate them. Fix that. Leave everybody else. Let me deal with politicians. Then if you want to do something else, let me do one for everybody else. You know. But you're getting confused, or you might be deliberate, because then the commission got so much work to do. They ain't gonna get a chance to deal with yours. Sir, I said I will support this legislation if you fix it. That's one of the fixes. I sat down in the Joint Select Committee and I made certain recommendations. And these were part of my recommendations, and I still believe it because nobody has convinced me otherwise. I am willing to be convinced otherwise if you can. But you haven't, and as a result, I cannot support this thing. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for indulging me.
Thank you, sir. Senator Goodage is our next speaker.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. President. I want to say just a few words on this matter. Mr. President, integrity legislation has always been a very sensitive area, very sensitive indeed. And this particular piece of legislation, which we are examining today, is aimed at promoting and encouraging high moral standards in public life. You and I believe, sir, that such legislation is badly needed. In fact, we may even say it's too long in coming. Mr. President, countries such as Barbados are being scrutinized by international agencies over and over. And it is now a fact that corruption can indeed hold back your country. And sir, we in Barbados must send a strong message to those international agencies that we are serious about stamping out corruption in high places. And so, sir, the integrity of those who govern this country is very important to us. As you've heard this morning, sir, this is a way of making sure that you did not get rich off the government. That is that you got into politics 5 years ago, and at that time you had a mere $5,000 in the bank. But now at the end of your first term, you have $5 million on the bank. We are indeed trying to stamp out things such as this. And you and I know, Mr. President, that rumors such as the greasing of a politician's hand to get things done or to ensure certain benefits are not unusual here in Barbados. We know of those rumors, sir. They're not unknown elsewhere either. They're not unknown elsewhere either. Sir, there was a time not too long ago when there was a tremendous ethical slide in this country. And the public attributed that massive erosion of ethics to the fact that certain politicians yielded to temptation. Sir, the will to enrich oneself came to the fore and was more powerful and more evident than the will to be responsible, than the will to be honest. Indeed, sir, whenever there was a conflict between ethics and integrity on the one hand, and greed and self-aggrandizement on the other, ethics and integrity lost the battle. Mr. President, there are some people who seem to think that government money has no owner. Especially, sir, those who work in areas where cash money is paid on behalf of the government. From top to bottom, sir. And sir, can you just imagine, sir, that persons have got into trouble for pocketing maintenance money from the courts? Sir, the problem is that the more you do it and succeed in doing it, the more you want and the more greedy you get and the more you continue to do it. Because, sir, you seem to get numb and you do not even realize that it is something wrong which you are doing. So, sir, the bill that we're discussing today shows that government is indeed serious about stamping out corruption. I believe, Mr. President, that it sends a very strong message that this particular government will not be tolerating any acts of corruption. We will not be continuing from where other people left off. Indeed, sir, we want Barbados to be seen and recognized on the world stage as a country which frowns on corruption. Sad to say, sir, that is not the reputation that we have now. Many people, sir, will want to offer a bribe. That's the offer. But, sir, the deal is not complete unless someone else, the public official or the politician, is willing to accept that bribe. Unfortunately, sir, many believe that that is where the public officials come in and seal that deal. I know of a fellow, sir, who requested in the registration department, in the birth certificate section, requested that someone change the information on his birth certificate to make it appear that he was 10 years younger than he was. And he said all he wanted done, it isn't a big thing, all he wanted done was a 5 changed to a 6. In other words, that he was born in 1963 and not 1953. Because he wanted to continue working for another 10 years. And he was willing to offer the person that he contacted $2,000. Obviously, the person refused, gave him a tongue lashing, and put him in his place. But this only shows you the kind of approaches which are made to some of our government workers. And, sir, where the politicians are concerned, I think, sir, that it is indeed very unfortunate